You're getting old when you have to make that noise when you
That
sit.
noise.
Sorry that y'all had to hear that. Thank you all for coming. My name is Bridget Todd. I am so thrilled to be joined with Leslie Mack, one of my favorite humans. I'm so happy that you all decided to come for this session. You might have seen these questions that I have on the board here. And the reason for this is because I'm a podcaster and I make a podcast about the internet. So I'm obsessed with hearing people's own experiences about what being online has been like for them, what kind of experiences they can expect when they log onto the internet. So feel free if you want to submit your responses using the Slido app. We would love to hear them if you've got a particularly interesting take on your experience online or a particularly funny meme that you have on your phone. I would love to hear that because I'm obsessed with people's internet experiences. And I should say that when I first sat down to start thinking about my remarks, I was like, I want to talk about my podcast and the internet and all of that. And when you agreed to be the moderator, Leslie, I thought, no. So I threw all of that out, all of those prepared remarks, because how often do we get to have two Black women who have such specific experiences of showing up online, who are also making podcasts about, identity and how it intersects with culture and our lived experiences. So I'm so thrilled that you are here today. Tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm so excited to be here. My name is Leslie Mack. I'm a digital strategist and communications director for the Frontline, and I also co-created and co-host a podcast called Blackberry Jams by Ben and Jerry's. And yeah, it's the show itself is about the intersection of fish fandom and Blackness and Black liberation work. And it's been a really interesting space to be in. So when you asked, I was like, yes, let's get into it. I'm ready to talk about all of those intersections and this ecosystem of podcasting as well.
Absolutely. And so my podcast, There Are No Girls on the Internet, is really all about the way that marginalized voices, women, queer folks, trans folks, people of color show up or don't show up online. And so I would love if we could ground the conversation there. You've joined me on the show to talk about what it is like for Leslie Mack to show up as a visible Black woman on the internet with something to say.
Yeah.
What is that experience like?
It's a little like dodging bullets sometimes. It's complex, but also it's community. I always talk about it as a both and. I mean, I think we definitely have a lot of oppression, a lot of anger that comes at us, and at the same time, we're able to support each other, rally around each other, connect with each other, and make sure that we're showing up for our communities in really unique ways on the internet. So it's both and.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and I think that's one of the reasons why the work that we do exists and is important. I think that it's really easy for people who do not occupy our specific identities to understand what the experience of being online is like for us. People often ask, why is your show called There Are No Girls on the Internet? And it's kind of an inside joke with myself, but it's sort of one of those informal rules of the internet that if someone is saying they're a woman online, then they're lying, they're not actually a woman. Or, that when we log on to the internet, the experiences that we're having are the same. It doesn't matter your identity, you leave your identity at the door. And both of those things are not true. And I just got so sick of the conversation about what it means to show up online as ourselves authentically, just not really centering or including us. And I guess one of the reasons why I bring this up is because we know, you and I, that our experiences are integral to what makes the internet, right? There's no way to tell a true, authentic story about what it means to be online and not ground that in the marginalized experience, right?
Absolutely.
Folks of color, queer folks, Black women.
We make the internet. We're the cool part of the internet, right? And so everything flows from our brilliance, our genius, our Black excellence, so to speak. And so, it's indicative in all sectors. We can look at music, we can look at culture, we can look at everything, and the internet is no exception to, looking at the brilliance that Black people, marginalized people bring to these spaces and ignoring what it means for us to bring our brilliance there.
Okay, so I know that you're meant to be interviewing me, but I have so many questions for you.
Okay.
So you're a Fish fan.
I am.
You love a jam band.
Very much.
So I dated someone who was big into jam bands, and something that I realized that I didn't know was a big part of the jam band culture is like internet message boards, like meeting up to be like, oh, we're gonna exchange, recordings, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that.
Yep.
Has that been part of your experience as a Fish fan?
Absolutely. And the reason why we started Blackberry Jams, shout out to my co-host and co-creator Lenny Duncan, was because we recognized, there's a Fish group for everything. Like if you're a lesbian, there's a group for that. If you want to save the trees, we got a group for that. There's a Fish fans for racial equity called Free. So there's a wide range of like almost anything. There's a if you're a teetotaler and don't drink or do anything like that, there's a group of folks there to meet you as well. And so we wanted to fill what we saw was kind of a gap. And it's been interesting, both becoming more visible in the Fish space, which I, in hindsight, really did not give much thought about, Bridget. I'm going to be really honest with you, because usually this is where I go to disappear and become very invisible. And so one of the outcrops of the show has been, like, I went to a show in Portland, and, like, somebody recognized me, and I was so shocked and bewildered. So now I'm just dealing with that reality as well. So it's been interesting kind of in that vein. And so, yeah, there's message boards, there's always leaks of stuff, hearing about things, new information, what's the best stuff to do around venues, all of that stuff. So the internet has been integral to the Fish community and continues to be. And all jam bands, there's a new group called Goose that's becoming really popular, and their internet presence is serious, like really serious.
Jam bands always have the best names.
Yes, I know, right? They have these really cool socks that are geese, and everyone's like, Goose. It's really funny.
I love it. So much of your work and my work is about this intersection of, I guess I would say, and I'm curious to hear what your experience online has been, because this definitely is part of mine, kind of straddling a line between visibility and invisibility. You said that Fish fandom and jam band fandom used to be where you went to feel not visible,
Yeah.
but now you take up this like visible space in it. And I guess I identify with that in a lot of ways in my own online experiences. There are times when I am using the internet because I want to feel invisible. I want to feel unseen. I want to feel anonymous. And I'm always bumping up against these experiences where sometimes I don't get to make that choice. Sometimes other people make the choice for me, that even in a time where maybe I'm looking for a little bit of anonymity, I'm not really given it. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially because we both have large voices, especially if we're talking about Twitter or someplace like that, it's been interesting because there's a switch that happens. There's like a moment where it's like, oh, I can just say anything, nobody really notice. And then one day that's not the case anymore. And for me, it's been about kind of straddling that line and thinking about the impact of my words and how the size of my reach needs to be adjusted. It's like a dial. And part of that's just responsibility of voice. And it's something that Black women bring into internet spaces that a lot of people don't. And so our peers are the folks that I've learned from. I'm like looking at, okay, how are they moving? What are the ways in which we don't want to harm people, because the larger your reach is, the more possibility exists of you bringing who knows what into folks' sphere. And so some of that is about that responsibility, and that's what kind of cuts off that invisibility piece, is the accountability. I'm okay swapping it though. I'm all right. I've settled into it a little bit, yeah. And maybe I have a fake Twitter account as well, maybe.
Ooh. Yeah, this is something, I know that we've talked about this on the podcast before, and it's something I don't think I ever really thought about critically for myself until we had that conversation on the show, which is, so we know that for traditionally marginalized people, just the act of showing up online can be really fraught for us sometimes. Mm-hmm. We move through the digital landscape differently than, say, a heterosexual cisgender white man. And, you said something about how when sometimes it feels like there are people, as your visibility grows on a platform like Twitter, for instance, sometimes it feels like there are people who are just waiting in the wings to be like, oh, she said something that I didn't like, and now I'm going to make sure that everybody sees it, and I'm going to gleefully pile on. And I guess I wonder, do you feel that there are spaces for particularly Black women where our humanity is really centered. I don't feel like I'm rarely on Twitter, even though, I'm kind of supposed to be for work, because I just don't feel like it's a place where my humanity is centered. I don't feel like a human when I show up on Twitter.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's definitely the expectation of us, and it goes back to that hypervisibility, invisibility, dual mind that we have to exist in, which is that simultaneously we're under a microscope, but also can be ignored at the drop of a hat. And it's a bit of a thing, it does something to your mind a little bit, where you just don't want to be in those spaces. And do I think there's one? Not that I know of. I'll be just being honest, I don't know. I do spend a lot of time on TikTok because that feels not necessarily safe, but I'm a voyeur there, and that feels a little safer, yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say this. I find myself on TikTok a lot as well. I have made exactly one TikTok. It is about my cat.
Cat TikToks are popular though, so.
I think there's something about the way that people show up. It's performance-based, and so I feel like I can just scroll through for hours and watch the show, and boy, do I. But I also feel like there's not for me, there doesn't feel like a pressure to show up a certain kind of way, the way there is on a platform like Twitter. And, you said something that I think is so fascinating, that, we are at the same time, it feels like we can be under a microscope on a lot of digital spaces, but also ignored. A big part of my show is talking about all of these different ways that usually Black women or women of color or people who have been historically marginalized are doing a lot of the heavy lifting of making these spaces safer, more inclusive. Oftentimes they're doing it at great personal cost or great risk to their safety. I think I've probably had like 3 or 4 conversations on the podcast where the guest I was speaking to was in some form of actual, I don't want to say hiding, but was on some sort of elevated risk level of oh yeah, trolls posted my information on the internet, so kind of a weird time to be talking, but let's do it. And I guess I know that in those conversations, so often, the people that have power or institutions are not listening to our voices. And so I'm reminded of women like Shafiqa Hudson. Her story is so fascinating to me. Shafiqa Hudson, if you don't know her story, she was kind of a Twitter super user a few years ago, and she noticed all of these kind of strange accounts on Twitter pushing this hashtag End Father's Day. And these accounts would say things like, End Father's Day because Black men don't take care of their kids. End Father's Day because Black men date outside of their race. Things that just didn't make any sense. And they were kind of mimicking the voices of Black women. Now, as Black women, we know that they actually were getting it really wrong.
Very.
Yeah, Shafiqa describes it as obviously racist word salad is how she describes how they would speak. And truly, when this happened, she reported this to Twitter. She tried to raise the alarm, and nobody did anything. And in our conversation, she said, the reason why nobody did anything is because the targets were Black women.
Yep.
And people don't listen to Black women. And so it's an interesting experience of being hyper visible, sometimes in all the wrong ways, but also feeling erased and so marginalized at the same time. And, just a few years later, in the 2016 election, Senate inquiry report finds that Russian agents were using that exact same tactic to target Black communities on social media, pretending to be Black people, using tense issues like racial justice and things like that to try to create chaos and discord. And in this report, they found that no single group was targeted more than Black social media users.
Yeah.
And so that always makes me think, had people with power actually listened to her when she raised the alarm about this years earlier, what would have happened? And so I guess I wonder, I don't know, is there a way that we can figure out to have folks with power and institutions actually pay attention to us and listen to us when it matters, and not just ignore us when we actually have something to say?
Yeah, I talk all the time about how Black women are constantly cast as Cassandra. And, for those who don't know the Greek myth, Cassandra was blessed with the gift of sight. She could see into the future, but she rejected the God who gave her that power. And so he cursed her with no one believing any of her prophecies, even though they would always come true. So she spent her whole life knowing what was going to go wrong and that nobody would believe her. And that's the role we play so often, not just on the internet, but definitely on the internet as Black women and as marginalized people, being the ones, like, they're coming for us first. Trust me, if they're here for us now, it's a matter of time. The clock has now started. And, in response to the fake Black people on the internet, what did we do? We created "Your Slip is Showing" hashtag and started just tagging people like, this person isn't Black. And I'm going to tell you in a very short hashtag really quickly that that's the case. And so we create our own ways to disrupt our erasure. And would it be great for the powers that be? Absolutely. I mean, the scary part of it is that this is actually against their own interest, and that the white supremacy culture and misogynoir and misogyny and patriarchal societies obscure that. People always say, like, oh, green does everything. It doesn't. I see people throw money away in service of oppression all the time, and this is a great example of that.
The way that you put that, throwing money, I feel, so as you know, I do, in addition to doing a podcast, my day job is with Ultraviolet, which is a national gender justice organization fighting to build a feminist internet. And that work involves a lot of social media platform accountability. So sitting down with leadership from Facebook, Twitter, and that's exactly how I feel. You are leaving money on the table by some of the choices that you're making. There is almost no community, I feel, that is a more prolific user of social media than Black folks. Like, imagine if Black folks were not on Twitter. It would just be Wordle scores and like journalists trying to make little jokes and all of that. It would be a nightmare, right? And so wouldn't it be in the best interest of platforms, just writ large, to really make sure that these user bases are supported and amplified and really nourished? I'm very heartened when I see platforms taking steps to acknowledge that. And so when they're saying, like, you are a super user, you are making our platform better, we're going to amplify you and make sure that you have what you need to keep doing this work. But I feel like it's not enough. I want to see more platforms acknowledging that they would be nothing without marginalized creators.
It's true, but there's a double-edged sword on their side of things, which is really unfair and unfortunate, which is their valuations are based on users. So even fake users are beneficial to them financially. And so we find ourselves just confronting these same capitalistic systems that put profit ahead of everything else, even the health of their own platforms and the health of the people that are interacting on them. And it's, again, yeah, I mean, we deal with it every day. We're always talking about these things as they come up. And I want to pivot just a little bit to misinformation and disinformation, because you gave a great example during the 2016 election, but it happens all the time. It's only getting worse. It's increasing, not just around politics anymore. Now we're seeing it in so many places. And your podcast deals with this. I know that your work in the world deals with this. So to me, it feels less of a topic concentration for you, but a real calling. So where did that come from? Like, when did Bridget decide, like, nah, these people lying on the internet, I'm coming for them. Let's get into it, and I'm gonna handle them. What is that?
So I love this question. The internet gave me my voice. I wouldn't be who I was if not for the internet. And I was on the internet. I still remember that the very day the internet came into my life, my dad brought home this clunky gray desktop computer that I feel like legitimately was the size of a mini fridge. And we set it up in what later will become called the computer room. And you weren't allowed to take beverages in there and all of that. And up until then, I had been this sheltered kid living in a small town in the South, just yearning for more. And when the internet came into my life, it was like my father had given me wings. Like, it changed the course of my life. And I was able to figure out who I was, what was going on in the world, and my place in it. And so I felt very lucky that I got to exist and grow up on a relatively healthy digital landscape, right? This was many, many years ago. And I guess when I see the way that things like misinformation, disinformation, online harassment, hate speech, the way that has made the landscape worse, And I feel like I look back on myself and think, where would I be if the internet had just been a marketplace for my negative experiences and for my pain? And aren't I lucky that I got to really enjoy the internet as a source of self-exploration and validation and affirmation? And I wondered, is the younger generation, are we leaving a worse internet for them? And so, I started thinking about all the things that make the internet sometimes kind of not such a fun place to be. And I think misinformation was one that really stuck with me. And I know that now we're having, rightly so, all kinds of conversations about COVID misinformation, vaccine misinformation, and I'm really happy that we're having those conversations. They're very important. However, misinformation does not begin and end with COVID. It's a big deal. We should definitely be talking about it. But I think that misinformation that is so often grounded in attacks on people's identities by design, right? And so I've just seen the ways that misinformation, bad actors find these very insidious, very savvy ways of targeting people's values, their fears, their traumas, their baggage, the things that we all show up with every day. And rather than creating the conditions for us to talk about those things honestly or openly or get somewhere on them, they turn up the dial, they inflame them, and they make us believe the worst negative caricatures of who we are based on our identity. And so I felt like a big challenge to having an internet ecosystem that's just a lot more healthy was really tackling things like mis and disinformation, because ultimately those kinds of things, they make it just difficult for us to trust institutions and trust each other. I don't want somebody to say like, oh, I read some nonsense on the internet about how Black women leaders are all really angry, and so now I'm against this Supreme Court nominee because I read something on the internet that really reinforced this like terrible, incorrect stereotype about Black women. I don't think that as a society we will ever be able to make any kind of progress on the huge laundry list of issues that are facing us if we do not have a functioning, healthy online media ecosystem. And without that, we don't have a functional democracy. If everybody cannot show up online and express themselves, we don't have a functional democracy. And so it's not just, I like to root the conversation in the marginalized experience because I'm a Black woman, but it's really everybody's problem, because we can't have a healthy democracy unless we have a healthy internet.
I love what you said, everything you said, but also just kind of taking back to that moment where the internet came into your life. Last night, I was with a bunch of other Black women, and we were talking about the innocuousness of those early days of the internet, like with a level of innocence in our eyes, thinking like, oh, these are cool tools. We'll be able to use them to do our work and connect with people, and not really giving a lot of, forward casting and thinking about the nefarious ways in which these same systems and accessibility would be weaponized against marginalized people and against our really critical work around racism, around democracy, around lots of things, climate, ableism, all of these really important issues. And so while it's been great to see folks' voices be lifted up in these spaces, I think that we were a little naive in our initial approaches. And I think that right now what we see is especially Black women being much more savvy in the ways in which they want to interact on the internet, the ways in which they want to be seen on the internet, and really taking the time to craft their online identity in a way that protects them and also validates them as someone who is a truth teller. And I think all of that comes from what you just said, which is we've been just watching mis and disinformation about ourselves, about our communities happen. And what we watched was what happened in the real world moved directly onto the internet and to social media spaces. So we can talk about the fallacy that Ronald Reagan pushed as the welfare queen and connect that directly to and Father's Day, right? It's the same mis and disinformation, the same target audience, but we're just different tools that folks are using to do it. And so I think making those connections is critical because they understand that first part, the real world part, right? And so the work that you do, the work that I do is to help people see that those things are happening in digital spaces and that we have to react. We have to actually be proactive, not reactive.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with so much of what you said. And it kind of makes me sad. We've been friends for a long time. We do very similar work. We show up very differently on social media. I think I told you this when we were doing when you came on my podcast. I don't post any pictures of anyone that's not me or another public figure on my personal social media feed. Because, and I used to, that's like a newer evolution of how I've learned to present myself on social media. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't want to open up other people in my life to be weaponized.
Yep.
And so I make a very conscious choice about what parts of myself I give to the internet and what parts of myself I'm just not able to. And you do a different thing.
Yeah. So I definitely utilize, I talk about using the internet in kind of 4 different ways. So there's communication, so I'm just like spewing out stuff and giving people things. Conversation, so I want to talk with people. Amplification, so I'm lifting up folks like you. And then agitation is that last one. So I do a lot of agitation, generally speaking. But the conversation pieces where I bring my personal life onto the internet is really crucial for me. It's been really great in building community and also putting joy onto the timeline. Like for me, it's really about breaking up the spaces. Like if I'm out here, all I'm doing is talking about the tough stuff that I have to go through. It allows people to position me as a 2-dimensional individual. And so adding the personal information, whether it's my nieces or like TikToks with my family or my friends, I have some rules around that and like one, asking permission from those individuals so they know I'm sharing. But for me, it was about making sure people see me as a person. Like I have a mom and I have sisters and I have people that love me. And I have felt that has kept the hate at bay a lot. It has allowed folks to see, oh, wait a second, this isn't just, a blue check or whatever people would want to say if they get angry about something I say. It's like, no, this is a real person. And so creating a 3-dimensional presence on the internet has kind of been a bit of a, safety barrier for me, which sounds like it shouldn't be, but again, it's about like when your reach reaches a certain point, people can really flatten your identity, flatten yourself. And putting my personal pictures and things from my life have kind of put a little barrier between me and that and created a 3-dimensional Leslie Mack on the internet, pretty much.
That's so interesting. Listening to you talk, I don't think I realized until this very moment that I was describing how when my dad first got us on America Online, it was one of the first times in my life that I really felt seen and affirmed. And now I just move through digital experiences not expecting to feel seen. Like I don't even post things or go looking for things that would feel like validation or feel like being seen, because I almost feel like I've just given up on the internet as being a space where I can really be seen. Mm-hmm. And I remember the last time that I was very, very invested in an online community. I had just moved from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. I had moved there completely sight unseen. I had never even been to California before. I just moved there kind of like on a whim. It didn't go well. I don't recommend that.
I was going to say you're not there anymore.
Yeah, I'm not there anymore. I was supposed to live there for at least 2 years. I lasted 6 months. So what does that tell you? I at the time was transitioning my hair from being relaxed to natural. And if anyone's ever done that, it is a awkward process, to say the least. Yes. It's a process. And, I didn't know anybody in San Francisco. I didn't really have a community of people to back me up and be like, yeah, you got this. And so I turned to Reddit and I became a moderator and super user of a natural hair community on Reddit. And it was online, but I didn't have anybody in my real life because I didn't know anybody in San Francisco who could be that community for me. And so it felt like real, genuine connection. And it was something that was really, really important and affirming and valuable to my life. And what's sad to me about that is that it felt, you were talking about being naive. In the beginning, it just felt like this cool thing that I got to have in my life and this cool community of women I could tap into when I needed some affirmation or support. And then as it went on, I would get people sending me pictures of monkeys and telling me all kinds of horrible things just because I was existing, just because I was trying to exist. And so I left the platform. I was like, I can't, the cost is too high logging onto Reddit every day and having to wade through some of the stuff that I got, it got to me. And I was like, this is not worth having this in my life. And so I think I'm generally pretty optimistic when it comes to the internet because I believe in the power of the internet and I believe in the power of the people who care about the internet. But, listening to you speak, I'm realizing how much negative experiences have really changed my behavior. And when I log onto Twitter, it's usually a slog. I'm usually not like, oh, I'm so excited to see what's there. Usually it's like, I have to be there for some reason. I have to promote something, or I have to do something or other. And it's not like, I wonder, how do we get back to that feeling of excitement and freedom and connection, or is it just gone forever?
Oh, is it gone forever? I don't know if it's gone forever. I think times have changed and the ways that we find that community have changed. I know, I'm not on Facebook, but I still have Facebook groups. And that's been a bit of a haven for me. I mean, there's a Facebook group, man, it's just me and 2 people. And we just go there to hey, this looks wild. What do you think about it? And so for me, it's been about curating different spaces on different platforms that are able to be affirming and that I'm able to functionally shape. They have become smaller. They've become more private. They've become less open to the public. And that's worked for me, but it has not been as robust. And I think that's where what you're talking about comes into play. And the question is there something else that can be built? I don't know if these platforms are going to ever be able to respond at this point to the level of hate that those of us that have marginalized identities are faced with. I think what I talk about oftentimes is what we have to do individually and collectively to protect ourselves. So what is your plan for when something blows up and you're just like, I need to step away from this? Who takes your phone? Who logs you out? Who goes through your DMs for you? Those are the things, and it's a shame, but it is about protecting ourselves, protecting our individual sanity and safety, and building in some systems for yourself. My husband and I have really direct protocols when, okay, the wrong person retweeted that tweet. It is now clearly somewhere that it shouldn't be on a 4chan page or Reddit, and you can watch it. You've experienced it, where it's just complete cavalcade and avalanche of hate coming at you. And of course, your tweet was innocuous. It was just something in your head that you decided to share. But being who we are, it changes the perception in the world. And so for me, it's about building in those stopgaps to say, okay, now I'm stepping away. I mean, I was cool engaging on this, and now I'm not anymore. So no, I'm not going to delete my tweet. Y'all can go ahead and say what you want about it, but you know who's not going to see it? Me. I'm not going to see it.
Enjoy screaming into the wind.
Good luck with that.
I mean, I agree with so much of what you said. We interviewed this writer, Liz Lenz, and she's experienced the same thing where it's these cycles of hate and harassment on Twitter. And something that she said, which I really stuck with me, is that I think a lot of people think, I barely ever tweet, I barely ever post anything online. No one is who would ever, swarm up against me? I never say anything. And she actually says it could be, you would never know what will be the thing, that the innocuous joke that you tweeted that wasn't offensive, but somebody took it the wrong way. You really never know what could be the thing. And so her philosophy is that it could be anybody at any time, and so you should have a plan for if it becomes you. You shouldn't just be waiting around oh, it'll never happen, because it very well could.
Yeah. It definitely could happen at any time, to anyone, for any random reason. Like I said, it just takes the wrong one account to decide, it's your day, let's go. I mean, it's that running joke, who's the main character on Twitter today? Who are we all talking about? Sometimes it's just funny and great, and sometimes it's really awful, and somebody really needs support and backing up. And so staying connected in that way is really crucial too, which is when do we need to ride for folks? When do we need to show up for them? How do they want that to be done? I'm always one to pop in folks' DMs hey, I see what's going down. what does support look like for you right now? Would it be helpful for me to say something or not? So all of that is really, again, about that proactiveness of just giving people the autonomy that we want, even in our active support. What does it look like to say, hey, it might not be helpful for my large account to share this thing, awful thing that's happening, but maybe more helpful for me to back end to folks at Twitter and say, hey, this is happening. What can y'all do about this? What protections can we have? Or linking them with somebody who does cybersecurity and getting them some additional support for a bit of time. So yeah, those are the things I think about. But having a plan is crucial, and then having each of us think about what our responses to the hate, what our responses to when something happens to whoever that person is on that day or minute. That's the other thing, though. It will pass. Unfortunately, there'll be a new character.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of an aside. Do you feel, so I feel that in the last few years, the temperature, especially on Twitter, has just been so turned up, and it is a rarity that I tweet anything that is of any real substance these days, because I'm just like, oh, I don't want to deal with it. But even for conversations, I think I tweeted an opinion about this P.T. Anderson film, Licorice Pizza. I didn't like it, and I was like, I don't like this movie. And I realized, because I had tweeted about how I didn't like this one movie, which I thought was an innocuous thing, P.T. Anderson, he's not going to stop making movies because I didn't like his one film.
He'll be fine.
He'll be fine. I realized that there were going to be that people were going to reply to it over and over and over again. Then somebody retweeted it, and then I just deleted it. I was like, I don't care to engage. It's not even worth engaging on this platform, because it is so flattened, and every conversation becomes about, like, I couldn't even have a nuanced conversation about my thoughts on this film because the temperature felt so turned up on social media that it wasn't even worth it. And so I guess my question is, have you found that to be the case? And if we're not able to have conversations about a movie, how will we ever have the real substantive, thoughtful conversations about the actual things that are facing us as a country, the actual things that we need to move forward on, if we don't have a media landscape that really enables us to do that?
Yeah, I think you're definitely right about the temperature being turned up. I think it's been up for a while. It continues to be. Lamentably, it's become a way for folks to kind of like get their attention as well. And so that's why I think the temperature's up. It's become, a type of persona on the internet is the person that's going to definitely go really hard in the paint for Licorice Pizza or for anything else for that matter. And so, yeah, I think that that's very true, that the temperature's been turned up. I think that's why we're seeing such a big push for audio on social, because there the nuance is possible. There you can control who's got the mic. There you can control what's happening more. You can't control who's seeing, but it's a different type of interaction. And so to me, it's been, obviously Clubhouse came on the scene in the last couple of years and really blew up, and Twitter now has Spaces, and Meta will be getting into audio space for sure. It's just a matter of time. I'm sure they're ready at any moment to roll it out. And to me, it's indicative of a desire for users to be like, okay, like I don't do threads anymore. I used to do really like detailed, intricate threads. I don't do them anymore. And I was reminded the other day, because I didn't stop myself and I did one. And of course, somebody picked it up. It went really like wild somewhere, and people were reckless in my mentions. And it was, I even, like, I think I quote tweeted myself and I said, this is my final reminder, like, no more threads. That's it. Like, no more threads for you. It's gone. Because that, for me, was the only way to really share a nuanced kind of take on something. And what happens is someone takes like the third tweet in a 20-tweet thread, and that becomes the center of the attention when it's like mid-thought, mid-point, narrative that I'm trying to lay out. And I recognized this was no longer a format that I could utilize for that purpose. And so what do I do with those thoughts now? Where do they go? And that was just something I had to kind of think through. Do I write something on Medium? Do I pitch somewhere? Is this important enough for me to want to say something? Do I put it somewhere else? And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of it for me has been like kind of navigating this decision daily, minute by minute, hour by hour. What access am I allowing people to have to me? Some days it's more, some days it's less. When I'm on vacation, for example, I'm like, catch me on IG. Like, you're not gonna see me on Twitter at all. I won't be tweeting. So it's really, for me, about kind of that decision-making process. We each have to kind of go through and decide how we're going to be on each of these platforms. I really like IG. I don't have a lot of followers there, and I don't cultivate any followers on that space. And it's great because nobody knows. I mean, really, it's just like my family and friends that follow me over there. None of you follow me. Okay, just saying. So for me, it's like that's kind of a thing where I can be more invisible in certain spaces on the internet, and how that becomes important to me to share different things and to show a different part of myself. But yeah, you're definitely on the money about that temperature. And again, like I said, I think people making their bones, their bona fides off of, really harming people and attacking people directly.
Yeah, I mean, that point that you just made is, if I had to pick one kind of rallying cry for my work and the work that I try to amplify on the podcast, is that we should not have a digital media landscape where scammers and bad actors and grifters can exploit that kind of outrage to make money. Yeah. And right now I feel like our internet is kind of a little bit of a scam economy.
It is. It's like, that's a business model, like,
yeah.
Directly, for sure.
And, I think it's important to identify when people are using platforms, knowing that these platforms algorithmically are going to amplify outrage. When everybody's like, oh, we hate this, it's like, oh, let's show it to more people. I think that we need to point out the ways that both platforms have really failed people. They have failed to cultivate an ecosystem where thoughtful, nuanced conversation is spotlighted, and people who are grifters or outrage grifters are not spotlighted or not amplified. So one, platforms I feel have failed. And then two, I think that we have just accepted that the choices of some of these platforms are going to have a kind of a big impact in the way that we feel day to day, right? So if I tweet something and then go to bed and then I wake up and it's like, oh, I have 30 notifications, it's a bad time for me. It's never a situation that I want in my life. And I wonder how we got to a place where we've just accepted that a big portion of the internet is going to be scammers and grifters who will then be amplified by platforms and use it to make money. Like, that's the thing that really just burns me up about where we are in terms of our digital media experience.
Yeah, I think that the grifter piece has become really lucrative, and it's become a way to get attention so fast. And the fastest way to do that, quite frankly, is to attack Black women. That's like the express train to notoriety, is to attack highly visible Black women on the internet and digital spaces. And, it's not a shock to me. Shout out to Moya Bailey. Misogynoir is like built into the architecture of our culture and certainly American society. But for those of us that have to actually live it, I think people don't really understand the toll it takes and what it does to your emotional state to just be innocuously going onto the internet, like everybody should be able to, if we're talking about an equitable society, and having to really put battle armor on, even just to do something as simple as checking your Twitter notifications on a given day, because overnight something wild happened. And we're not talking about Justine on her flight wild, just whatever it might be, your tweet about licorice pizza. And there's a second thing too, which is that traditional media organizations have really exploited our voices as well, really significantly. And a lot of times I get hate is because my tweet has been pulled and put in some article somewhere that I don't even know what it is, and people have read it there, and now it's getting attention from outside of the platform, and with not even a DM, hey, by the way, I'm gonna use your tweet in this thing. And I think that's another place where the media has not responded in a accountable way to the harmful ways that they've utilized Black women's words. I mean, whole articles, just our thoughts, is a very common thing, and they don't recognize that we're not grateful for that exposure. It's not helpful to us, and it's harmful. I mean, really brings a lot of folks that don't follow us, that aren't aware of who we are, into our spaces and make a lot of assumptions about us. And in that way, it becomes really harmful as well. I do want to switch gears just a little bit, just to go back to podcasting for a minute. I mean, we're both Black women podcasters out here trying to do the thing. I love your show so much. Every time I listen to it, I think, oh yeah, that's a conversation I've been having with friends or I've been wanting to have with my friends. So I'm curious, like, how do you describe what There Are No Girls on the Internet does that's different than a lot of other podcasts that talk about digital spaces? Like, what is the special sauce that's there?
What a good question. First of all, thank you. That's like what every podcaster wants to hear is, oh, I was listening to your podcast and that was a conversation that we had. So thank you for that dream compliment. Yeah, I would say, the reason that I created There Are No Girls on the Internet is, there are so many good, interesting technology podcasts out there. However, those podcasts hardly ever center the voices of women, queer folks, trans folks, sex workers, anybody who's marginalized, right? And I think that they do kind of, even the podcasts that I love, I think that they do kind of have a underlying assumption that we're talking about white people. We are white people making content for other white people, other straight people, other cisgender people, what have you. And I'll have to give an example, and I don't mean to say this to like crap on them because it is one of my favorite podcasts. I'm sure that y'all remember the Reply All stuff, right? And so my podcast straight up would not exist if not for Reply All. I love Reply All. I listened to every episode probably multiple times. It was my show. But when the whole controversy happened about their Bon Appetit content, I would go on and read the different Apple podcast reviews to see what people were saying. And time again, and the reviews probably still say this, hundreds and hundreds of reviews per week say some iteration of, I listened to Reply All to hear an interesting show about the internet, not about race or not about identity. And I had to really stop and ask myself, when you are purporting to make a podcast that is about the internet and technology, and your audience believes that they can tune into that podcast and not hear conversations about identity, well, whose story of the internet are you telling? And I say this as a huge Reply All fan, so this is no shade to them, but I wanted to build a place that was honest about our contributions to the internet and technology. And even in media that I really like, it is so rare to find content that I feel is honest about those contributions or really spotlights those contributions or centers them in a meaningful way. There are so many great, like Wired Magazine, I love. They do great reporting that really sits at the intersection of identity and tech, but that's like a couple of articles in one magazine. And so I thought there should be a place where every conversation about technology and the internet and how it impacts our world and society is really anchored by what I know to be the truth. And the truth is that traditionally marginalized people are the ones who are doing the work to make these spaces more inclusive, more interesting, more creative, and we're having very particular and very specific experiences on these platforms, and those experiences need to be affirmed and told and really dealt with. And I'm a big podcast person, I always have been. When I wanted to make a podcast that was about the intersection of tech and identity and culture, I went onto the Apple podcast charts to see what other kinds of podcasts are out there. And again, no shade to these creators because I think what they do is great, but so much of the content that is about technology that is either meant to be for people of color or women or somebody who has a marginalized identity, it's so kind of capitalistic, right? It's sort of like how to survive in your career. And there's nothing wrong with those kinds of shows, but I think that marginalized people also deserve heady conversations about what it means to show up online or how technology impacts our culture. And I think that so often when people are greenlighting projects for marginalized communities, it seems to be really rooted in this 9-to-5 grind, and that we're all interested in technology insofar as it can make us money or be a side hustle or we can get involved in crypto or whatever. And again, no shade to anybody for whom that is their ministry. Mm-hmm. But I think that we also deserve to have thoughtful conversations about the culture around tech that center us. We deserve it.
That's so interesting because what I hear you saying is that what is mostly out there is prescriptive podcasts, which is we're going to tell you how to do something, versus analytical, which is what you do so brilliantly, and really dissecting these moments and what's happening. So this brings me to my next question, which is, as I said, we're both Black women podcasters, and we know that podcasters like us get a very minuscule amount of attention, money, power, access, advertisers, sponsorships when compared to white male podcasters. And so what do you think the responsibility is of podcast producers, podcast production companies, advertisers? We had this huge reckoning in 2020. It was supposed to be this time where everybody was going to be opening up spaces for Black people specifically, and I haven't seen it in podcasting. So we do not. Our podcasts are on separate networks, so this is not a I want to name that because I think it's really interesting that we both have podcasts, but we are not in the same kind of tree of podcasting, and that persists. It is a thing that is very real, and what is that? Why? What is that break there where our value is so low when on the internet it's so clear our value is so high?
Oh, I love how you framed that. God, how much time do you have? I think that what I would like, the number one thing, I actually have a very concrete answer to your question. The number one thing that I would like to see people who have power, people who greenlight things in the audio world, and also just generally, is giving marginalized creators the space to fail like other people are given the space to fail. I can't tell you how many times people are like, oh, well, we greenlit this project and we gave it a little bit of money and then didn't really pan out, so we just ended it. And I feel like if you're going to meaningfully invest in the voices of marginalized people, sometimes that's a journey. Sometimes that's helping us find our voices and find our footing. And so if you want, I think there's a real kind of attitude where marginalized creators are meant to be this like never-ending well of creativity and content that's all gonna be gangbusters all the time. And we're not really given space to figure it out or to learn on the job or to really develop our voices and talent. And so I would say if you're gonna greenlight somebody, make sure that you're not just greenlighting them so that in a way that they're always going to be auditioning for the job that you've just set them up with, but that they have support, they have mentorship, they have money, they have power, they have decision-making power, so that you could actually see where they could lead. There have been so few times in my life where I feel like I actually got that space to tell the stories that I wanted to tell, and so the times that I get it, I treasure it and honor it, but it's rare.
It is very rare, and that extends to the rest of the teams that create podcasts, right? So when we were putting together Blackberry Jams, I was like, we need a producer of color and I need a sound engineer of color, because some of the stuff that we want to do with the show, how we want to tell the stories, I just knew a white person would not get some of these wild ideas we were trying to come to the table with. So we did like skits at the top of the show, and they were a little nuanced culturally. And it was great to be able to draw from a well of folks, but they did have to come from outside the ecosystem. And I didn't feel bad making that really direct ask, and the producer was very ecumenical and said, yeah, I get why you want that and why it's important to make a great show. But I think that what is the pipeline of podcast professionals that these entities are putting in place now, so that we have in the next 5 years a cadre of Black, brown, indigenous, marginalized, podcast producers, sound engineers, technicians, co-hosts. The entire ecosystem needs to create pipelines for folks like us to be able to learn, to make mistakes, to figure out what our voice is going to look like. I look at like for Colored Nerds that just came back, and I was thinking about how Brittany and Eric have spent a decade plus now, building a great following, but also refining what their voice was going to be. And it took multiple shows, multiple platforms, multiple ways of approaching it. And they're a very rare Black podcast pair that's been able to make transitions in a way that kind of refined their voice, not muted it or changed it in ways that weren't authentic to them. And I know it was a lot of risk on their part. They talk about it, so I'm not speaking out of turn. But we don't all have the ability to take those risks. And I think that these companies, for me, that's where I want them to really lean in. It's like, allow us to make risks, and you take the brunt of whatever that means, and allow us to continue doing our work.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many, it's gonna sound so like petty. Every single time I see somebody who gets greenlit for like a risk-taking podcast, it's usually not a marginalized creator. And it's something that I've just come to accept as a creator, that that's just not where the money is, that like the powers that be feel that risks are less risky when they're being spearheaded by certain people, and I am not one of those people.
I mean, we don't just get to walk into a meeting with HBO with like a napkin character
a drawing on a
name,
napkin.
a drawing, and get a season handed to. We don't get that. Yeah, you're right. We don't.
If anyone from HBO was listening, I definitely have a doodle in my bag that I can flip you.
We're ready.
Yeah, and I think, like, you know, to your question, there are so many amazingly talented, marginalized people making content, and so I don't believe that we have any kind of like pipeline problem. These people exist, they're not going anywhere. The issue is that they're not getting in the right rooms. People are not looking at them the way they should be looking at them. They're not amplifying them and not supporting them. And so honestly, in all, not just in the tech podcast space, but in all of technology, I almost kind of roll my eyes when people are like, oh, we need more training and more mentoring. And it's like, sure, but also they're there, they exist. You know, we're out here doing our thing. And the question is not if you're going to offer mentorship. The question is, are you going to give us money and power and space to do what we want to do? And I hope that the answer to that question becomes a lot more yeses in the future, as opposed to just being these kind of shallow ways of supporting our work.
Yeah, and not, because I think they see anything from marginalized folks that is not day in the life or recap of as risky. And when it's just a white guy that wants to talk about whatever, it's not seen as risky. So that's really interesting to me. I think we have a couple questions before we wrap up. I do have one last question for you, but let's see what we've got here. What makes you feel inspired and or keeps you moving forward when podcasting gets mundane? That's from May.
Oh, I appreciate the question. It does get mundane. I make my podcast pretty much, not entirely by myself, but a lot of it by myself in my kitchen, so it gets pretty old sometimes. The thing that keeps me inspired really is young people. You know, younger folks are making such interesting, authentic, like risky content, and I think when I think about the ways that they are showing up in the world with such boldness and such bravery, it's so hard to not be inspired. And so young people, definitely that's what keeps me in the fight, in the game, in the conversation, because it'd be so easy to just check out. But when I look at these like younger folks who are just building platforms from nothing and then using those platforms to say what they want to say, so inspiring.
Absolutely. We'll do one more question from the audience. For inclusion, how do we address invisible inequities like learning disabilities, mental health issues, and other neurodiversities that can be hidden handicaps? This is from Jennifer.
Oh, great question. I would say really listening to these communities and centering them, right? I think that it's so easy to say like, oh, we know what this community needs, we know how to amplify this community. On my show, I definitely try to give space to people from those communities to really talk about what they need themselves. And so I don't want to talk over anybody. I want you to tell me how I can best show up for your community. So I would just say by listening to them.
Excellent. All right, last question for you, Bridget. What makes you hopeful about the state of the internet and social media?
What a great question. Other than young people, I would say just that I think that we're in a moment where people are paying more attention to the conversations that are happening there and how they impact us personally. You know, the conversation that we had around Instagram and its impact on young women, I think was really important. I think it was a conversation that we weren't having 5-10 years ago. Yep. And so I think that I finally see us in a place where we're asking questions about tech companies and tech platforms and tech leaders and their decision making and how it impacts our actual day-to-day lived life and whether we're okay with that. I think that 5 years ago, people would not have felt like they had a say in how Mark Zuckerberg did anything. And I think today that's different. So that gives me a lot of hope.
That is very hopeful. We are no longer naive, is what you're saying.
That's right.
There you go. Thank you so much, Bridget.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank y'all for coming.
Thank you for
really
coming.
appreciate it.